What are the moral values that you choose to live your life by? Let me ask that question again. What are the moral values that you choose to live your life by? If we think about it, we've had conversations with people at different times in our lives where we've talked about morality, we've talked about values, we've talked about how we decide the right and wrong ways to live and behave and to treat other people. We're going through a series at the moment called Who Are You? My name's Joel, and that is part of who I am. But I'm also what I do for a job, aren't I? I'm the minister of this church, Bentley Baptist Church. Or is that who I am? Am I who I relate to? Am I my family? Well, maybe, but maybe that's not who I am. Am I the sum of my achievements and what I've done? Well, you could say that, but is that all that I am? We're going through this series, Who Are You? To really think about these questions of our own identity and where we find it. And this week, we are looking at morality, where we get our values from, who we choose to be when we have a choice to make about the right thing to do. When I was at my previous church, I was a youth pastor. I did loads of youth work, and I was going into a school to do some a lunch club, playing loads of games, tell some young people about Jesus. And I arrived in my office that morning before we set off for the school, and my intern was there, and we sat down, we went through what we were doing, and then I started to feel, all the time we were preparing, I started to feel this pain in my chest, and I thought, oh, whew, it's really bad indigestion today. God, it's really getting to me. But I ignored it. I pressed on. We went through most of the morning. And, this constant pain, I'd even popped out. I'd got some Rennie, maybe it's heartburn. Oh, my chest really hurting me. And but we kept powering on. And in all honesty, I wasn't being very useful. And my intern was, she was starting to get a bit concerned. She kept asking me if I was all right. And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And I was not fine. But the time came to set off for school, and we set off for the school where we were doing the lunch club, and we walked up this hill, and I was really struggling. This pain in my chest, it was really getting really, really painful. And we powered on. I kept on having to stop, and she was saying, Joel, you are not okay. Should you really be doing this? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. It's just some it'll go. It's just some horrible indigestion or something. We got to the school. We signed in. I wasn't looking great. We walked through the school. We walked into the room where we were holding the lunch club. We met up with someone from the local schools work team who we were working with. And I walked in and I passed out. Just passed out cold. I completely collapsed. An ambulance had to be called. I was wheelchaired out of the school and put into the ambulance, taken to hospital and checked out. And it turned out I had pleurisy. I had this infection in my chest that was causing me this pain, and it wasn't great. But I did such a typical man thing. I was like, just brush it off. Yeah, I'm fine. I'll walk it off. I'm sure I'll recover. But the fact was, I needed to recognize that I was ill and ask for help. Because in my mindset, I was like, no, we've got a job to do. We've got people to help today. We've got this club to do. We've got young people who, love to see us, who want to share with us. And we want to, help them get to know God better. But the whole time, I was not in any condition to help anyone else because I needed help myself. And it's like that in life as well. If we don't recognize that there's something wrong with us and look for help with that thing, we will continue to suffer and we will be of no use to anyone. In fact, we'll actually be a detriment if we don't get help with the things that we're getting wrong, that whether it's whether we're ill and that's wrong with us, or whether we're doing things wrong, whether our morality is off, if we don't get help with that, we're not going to be of any use to anyone. It's why this issue of where does our morality come from is so important. If you're not well, if you're not morally healthy, you're not actually going to be of any use to anyone. Let's read from the Bible where it starts to unpack God's idea of a morally good life. This is Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse 1. It says, imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. I could actually just stop there, couldn't I? Let's not. Let's carry on, okay? Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. So let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you, for such sins have no place among God's people. Obscene talk, foolish stories, and coarse jokes, these are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. You can be sure that no immoral, impure, or greedy person will inherit the kingdom of Christ and of God. For a greedy person is an idolater, worshipping the things of this world. Don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins, for the anger of God will fall on all who disobey him. Don't participate in the things these people do, for once you were full of darkness, but now you have light from the Lord. So live as people of light, for this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. Carefully determine what pleases the Lord. Now, we explored in last week's message that our standards for living, they have to be based on the standards of Jesus. As it says right at the front of this, imitate God in everything you do. We looked last week at how science gives us facts, but no moral guidance. And our emotions, well, they don't always tell us the truth about the situation we're in. Popular opinion, what most people think, can actually be wrong. More on that in last week's message. And our culture might not be a healthy one. The values of our culture around us might not be good for us and for the people of that culture. If you want more on those things, check out last week's message. But when we look for moral guidance, this makes it clear that we have to look beyond our own experiences and desires if we want to make a difference to the world. And I hope that you do. I hope that we all want to make a difference to the world. But the problem is that we can only make a difference in the world if we are different to the world. You can't make something different by being the same as that thing. Do you hear me? See, our impact in this life, it flows from our identity. It's a bit like concentric circles. You know, we are on the outside, you know, of circles of influence. On the outer circle, maybe we've got our community, that everything around us, and we want our community to be better. But how can we possibly change this massive community? Well, let's pull it in a bit. What about our organisation, maybe our workplace or our church? How do we make that better? Well, that's a pretty big thing for little me to influence, isn't it? How can I make an influence on a big organisation? It's a bit easier than my whole community, but still hard. Well, okay, let's pull it in further. What about my team? Just the people around me. I can have an influence on them, can't I? Surely, but they're their own people with their own minds and their own ideas about moral values and the way to live. Let's put it in even further. My family. The people closest to me, maybe my closest friends, surely I can have a powerful influence on their lives, can't I? Well, I'm afraid that sometimes our kids, they don't want to align with what we think is true and right just because we tell them or we try and force them or we discipline them. And our friends, well, they're just other people too. Sometimes we disagree with our friends on fundamental things. How can we influence anybody else in the world? Well, here's the thing. Influence in the world, making a difference to the world, only happens, as I've already said, when we are different to the world. If we want to make a difference in this world, the change has to start right here. Our morality has to be adjusted and aligned to become as good as it can be, to be aligned with the way of Jesus, to imitate the way of God. Because when our morality is aligned with his way, suddenly this part of the world right here has become different, and our influence flows outwards. If I have awful morality, if I'm hateful and selfish and greedy and unpleasant to people, if I'm just really overly sexualized and always making crude and coarse jokes, that flows out to my family. That's the example I set. It flows out to my friendship group. That's the example I set. It flows out to my team. That's the example I set. It flows out to my workplace, my church. It flows out to the whole community that I am part of. And suddenly, what is my influence flowing out from who I am? Well, it's going to be either positive because our morality is coming from a positive and powerful place, or it's going to be negative because it's coming from a place of selfishness, of darkness, and that still, sadly, has power. It's just not a good kind of power and influence. Your impact on the world flows not from the things you do out in the world, but your influence in the world, my influence in the world, flows out from the work we start in ourselves. This is why morality is so key, because the difference we make to the world starts within us. Now the passage, it says in verse 6, don't be fooled by those who try to excuse their sins. Have you ever tried to do that, to excuse your sin, to say, I'm a good person, but I only did this because, or I was having a bad day. I'm basically a good person, or, well, it's not as bad as this other thing that these people do or that person did. We try and excuse our moral failings by just saying, I just had an off moment. But you know what? There's no standard with God. There's no standard of big sins, greater, lesser. There's no, God will let you off this one because you're doing these good things. That's karma, and it's a load of rubbish. It says this, the same writer to the church in Ephesus, the passage from Ephesians, he also wrote to a church in Colossae, to the Colossians. And he said this includes you who were once far away from God. You were his enemies, separated from him by evil thoughts and actions. Yet now he's reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. And as a result, he has brought you into his own presence, and you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. You see, what Jesus did on the cross, that sets us free from sin. Okay, sets us free from the consequence of our sin. We can have eternal life through what he did when we believe in him and we accept that he did it for us, and we choose to follow him when we believe that Jesus died and rose to end the power of sin in our lives. So does this mean then we don't actually have to worry about our morality? We don't have to worry about sin anymore? Well, no, because the passage we read from Ephesians and that passage just now from Colossians about moral standards of behaviour, about imitating God's morality, they were written for Christians. They were things they were actually doing that the writer needed to write and say, Christians, don't do this stuff, guys. It's not a theoretical text. It was confronting what they were actually doing wrong, that was limiting their effectiveness for God in the world, limiting their impact on their family, their friends, their community, their workplace, the people that they wanted to reach and love and bless. You see, Jesus, as we've already looked, Jesus justifies us. He makes us right before God through what he did on the cross. But there's also something called being sanctified. He justifies us, but we need to be sanctified. Sanctified means to be transformed, to be made correct in our behaviour, to be made more like God in our actions and behaviour. And Ephesians 5 is about this. It's not about how we get saved. Jesus saves us. But then we need to make a choice about our moral standards, about imitating God and be sanctified. So let's look at some of the challenging phrases in this passage about sanctification, about morality. The first thing it gets into is it talks about, or one of the things it says, a greedy person is an idolater, worshipping the things of this world. You see, the Bible all the way through tells us that worshipping anything except for God is a big no-no. It is that the word is idolatry, making something of equal importance as God. And I wonder what things through our greed and our selfishness we put on the same level as God. Possessions, hobbies, things that we say, oh, I couldn't live without this. You know, the ultimate form of idolatry in the human race is making ourselves more important than God. Saying, I choose my morals, my truth, my way of living. I make that choice because I know best. That's idolatry. The Bible says at the beginning, you were made in the image of God. And I think that's why we get confused sometimes. We were made in the image of God. It says that in the book of Genesis. But we weren't made gods. And so we have an understanding of morality, but it's flawed, and we need to look to the one in whose image we were made to understand what its truest expression is supposed to be. Look at the one in whose image you were made to truly understand who you're supposed to be. Greed is the source of poverty and so much evil and darkness in our world. And so I want to challenge you today, challenge number 1. Are you holding your possessions with closed hands, it's mine, or with open hands to say, if I didn't have it, that would be okay. I don't need it. Are you holding on to pastimes? You know, drinking it. Do you like a casual drink? Are you holding on to that with closed hands or open hands to say, hey, it's not a problem for me? But do you need it? Well, that says maybe it is a problem for you. Or could you open your hands and let it go? Are you holding on to a car, a pair of trainers, a house if you're fortunate enough to be a house owner? Are you holding on to these things and saying, this is so important to me that I couldn't possibly let it go? If so, then maybe that thing has become an idol to you. Greed is a problem, and God says in his standard of morality, which is true and right, it's not an opinion, in God's standard of morality, greed is not on the table. Then verse 4, we read verse 4, and it tells us, obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes, these are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. See, God's people are not to be crude with our language. We're not to fill it with sexual innuendo and lewd jokes and make comments about one another's sexuality and physical appearance. We're not to be crude because it dishonors people. It makes trivial one of God's precious gifts to us, our physicality. It makes trivial God's gift of sex to the human race. It just says this is a joke. We don't take this seriously. And look at the impact that has had on the world. When we don't take sex seriously, the harm that is done to people because we think it's a commodity, because we think it's just another thing for sale, when it's just a thing to joke about. Sex is a gift to the human race. And when we give it the level of a humorous joke or a lewd, crude, just misunderstanding, we're just detracting from like people's worth as human beings, people's worth as created in the image of God. And so God says you're not to have obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes. And then in verse 3, it continues to talk about our understanding of sex, because it says there should be no sexual immorality or impurity among you. Now, the Greek word for sexual immorality here is porneia. Porneia. That's the Greek word used in this passage, the original translation. And it was most commonly used in the first century to refer to prostitution. So Paul is writing here, do not sell access to your body. Don't sell access to your body. For us today, yes, that means don't be a prostitute. But it also means think about the pictures that you put online of yourself. It means think about the way that you dress yourself in a way that doesn't point to your sexualized attributes. Think of, things like OnlyFans in the world today, this site where people just literally sell their, offer people the opportunity to pay money to look at them performing sexualized acts or in the nude and all of this stuff. This is the thing that Paul is warning us about right here in this passage. Don't sell access to your body, to your sexuality. Don't do that. Paul's telling the Ephesians that any kind of sale of their body, of using their physicality for money on a sexual basis is out. And it also uses this word impurity. The Greek word for impurity was akatharsia, which means surrendering to physical and lustful urges. So there are two sides to this. Don't let anyone use your body, and you don't surrender to your urges to use anybody else's body either. Now it's talking about immorality here. Is it saying that just sex is bad? Well, no, we've already said God has a high view of sex. God wants us to treat sex with honor and for it to have a protected place. And what is this? Well, later on in chapter 5, Paul stresses the honoring relationship between husband and wife. And he says that relationship is to be treated with the same honor and respect as the relationship between God and his church. A relationship between husband and wife is to be sacred, and that's why that is the place where sex happens. That is the place where sex is safe, or it should be safe. That is the place where sex should be honored. And in any other context, you don't sell your sexuality, and you don't lustfully crave it from others. The only place, according to this scripture, for sex is in marriage between a husband and a wife. Ephesians 5 is really, it couldn't be clearer on this. So staying away from sexual immorality and impurity is about honoring God and honoring others and not being selfish in our sexual desires. We're to be faithful to husband or wife, and in God's economy, we're to be sexually faithful to the one we may one day marry. If you're not married right now, you're to be faithful to the one you will one day marry by not giving in to your sexual desires with someone that you might not. This is very countercultural. It's a countercultural morality, but what is it? It's in the image of God, because God is faithful to his church, the bride of Christ. God is faithful to his church. He doesn't go off the church. He doesn't go off with someone else. He doesn't say to us, do you know what? I've had enough of you. I've got really excited by this other thing over here. I'm just going to leave it. And if that's God's way of viewing his relationship with us, his people, what the Bible calls his bride, then that needs to be our standard of morality for relationships as well. The passage goes on to say we're to be thankful to God. We're to be appreciative of his goodness and his lasting gifts instead of living on the short-lived instant gratification of wealth, possessions, or sexual experience. Sex and nice possessions, finance and humor. Do you know what? Those things, they are gifts from God. They're not to be sniffed at, but they're not to be the driving goals of our lives. Verse 10, it top and tails this in the passage. It says right at the beginning, imitate God, therefore, in everything you do. And at the bottom of the passage in verse 10, it says, carefully determine what pleases the Lord. A life lacking in sexual immorality, greed, and humour at the expense of others is a counter-cultural life. It's different to the world around us, because in the world today, sexual immorality is the norm. Greed is the norm. Humour at the expense of others is the norm. Greed that mistreats the poor is the norm. And so God calls us to be different so we can make a difference to the world around us. In the book of Ephesians, just like today, we read about people who were most concerned with pleasing themselves. How many of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus today have pleasing him as our primary goal in this life? Jesus was asked about the greatest commandment. He was asked about, what's your highest standard of moral guidance? What is your rule for life that you live by? And Jesus said this: the most important commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your strength. And then he said, the second most important is to love your neighbour as yourself. Hear me clearly. Jesus said the most important thing you can do to be different to the world and to make a difference to the world is to love God with all of your heart. The things that you love, God is first. All of your mind, the things you think about, God is first. And all your strength, the things you spend your energy on, God is first. And love your neighbour as yourself. And the amazing thing they then did was they challenged Jesus. They said, well, who's my neighbour? And Jesus told them something very surprising. And we're going to look more at that next week when we talk about culture. But for now, I want you to take to heart this message that pleasing God with our attitudes and behaviour, it makes the whole world a better place for our families, our children, our friends, our workplace and church, our community, our nation, and our world. And if we want to make a difference to the world, if you want to make a difference to the world, we need to choose to be different to the world. To make a difference in the world, we've got to be different to the world. Because then, as we are transformed by God's love and as we love others as he loves us, that transformation towards a life of sacrificial love will naturally and supernaturally flow from us out into the world around it. And as enough of us align with the way of God, imitating the one in whose image we were made, I believe the world will be transformed. God bless you. The Lord be with you. May you be transformed into the likeness of the one in whose image you were made. I'll see you soon.